Welcome. It is my honor to have this memorable, meaningful opportunity to speak with the Lord Alton of Liverpool, side by side. As you know, Fireside Chat was started 1943 when President Roosevelt wanted to discuss about his policy to the people. So I treat Lord Alton as someone equivalent to President Roosevelt because the subject is so important. At the same time, I think that it is important for us to have this small group of meeting to really deepen our discussion to find the solution of one of the most important issues like human rights in North Korea. My name is Eun Park. I am the board member and chair of International Committee of Credo Association. Credo Association is a not-for-profit organization which is to promote freedom and human rights based on human dignity through rule of law and justice. Among the guests participating in the fireside chat with us today are the board members of the Credo Association, retired justices, judges, and distinguished lawyers, diplomats, professors, businessmen, and human rights activists. We are different in callings and thoughts, but I believe it's the passion, that, and hope which bring us together here to shine a light on the closest but hidden nation, North Korea. Thank you all for coming, welcome. And I'd like to give special thanks to former National Assemblyman and Chief Judge Young-hae Lee, a board member of Credo Association, who made this event possible out to her genuine and thoughtful friendship with Lord Alton. Lord Alton, thank you for coming to Republic of Korea and joining us today. It's a great honor for us to have you here. From our research, you became involved in politics as a teenager in the age of 17. You have helped the people in need and also made some action against apartheid. And you became the youngest city council member. And then there was one slogan, as I know, when you ran for the member of the parliament. That is, everyone knows someone who's been helped by David Alton. So it appears that you had a really big heart to those who are in need. Here's my question. What shaped your perspectives and your views on helping people in your town and you were young? And also, you have reached out to those who had problems in outside of your country, such as Iraq, Afghanistan, Hong Kong, Sub-Saharan Africa, and also North Korea. So what is your perspectives and views on your attitude to the others?
Dr. Park, I'd like to start by thanking you and Young Lee for welcoming me to the Republic of Korea again, but also for hosting this fireside chat. I don't recall ever having done a Roosevelt fireside chat before, but I noticed that in the introductions there are a lot of people who are presidents, so presidents of various associations and very august bodies, so may I congratulate you on the work you do and all of the pro bono efforts that many of you make, which I think put many of us to shame. So I'm conscious that I'm in very distinguished company and with people who have accomplished a great deal in their own careers and lives. I got involved in politics, as you say, when I was a teenager, and I didn't join a political party that was in government or even a very big opposition party, but I admired its principles. It believed in liberty and freedom, free societies, and they were international issues that attracted me into politics, and I guess my generation had a choice. Either they became revolutionaries and took part in barricading buildings and demonstrations, or they decided to start trying to think seriously about the issues which face us and to see what we could do at the grassroots level, at the what I call the cold face of politics. So I went to Liverpool, which, as some of you will know, has the world's greatest football team. I went to Liverpool as a student and settled there and was living in the inner city, in a neighbourhood where half the homes had no inside sanitation or running hot water or bathrooms, where people were living in deeply neglected situations, and I wanted to try and do something about that. And my mother, who sadly is now dead, but my mother was an Irish speaker. Her first language was Irish, not English. Married my father at the end of the Second World War. He, along with his 4 brothers, had enlisted in the armed forces to fight Nazism. My father brought me up on the principle of duty, of the importance of playing your part. And my mother had a great belief in the strength of community, of people holding together. In fact, on the wall of our home, written in Irish when I was a boy, on a poster in the kitchen, were the words, "It is in the shelter of each other's lives that the people live." But my mother also had lots of Irish sayings, and one of which she said, "David, it is better to light a candle than it is to curse in the dark." Better to light a candle than it is to curse in the dark. And what she meant by that was that don't just complain about the way things are, try and do something practical about it. So I ran for office, and much to my surprise, I didn't dare tell my parents because my finals were still pending, and they would think that probably I wasn't studying hard enough. So I waited until after I qualified and passed my finals to say, oh, by the way, I was also elected to the city council in the recent elections. Our very small little political party in that city took control of the city. Within a couple of years, I became the deputy leader of the council and had a lot of experience then in trying to rectify some of the issues that I had been campaigning about. And there's nothing like that kind of cold-face interaction with people to shape you. But I never lost my interest in faraway places and the issues that I felt that people in politics could do something about. So, Dr. Park, when I was elected then as the youngest member of the House of Commons to represent the Liverpool constituency, I knew that beyond the day-to-day issues, the things that my constituents wanted me to engage in and which I did fiercely engage in, I wanted to see what more I could do about the things in faraway places. And as the years went by, I immersed myself more and more in those questions. Over the summer, I published with a colleague a new book called State Responses to the Crime of Genocide. And in there I recall that the first time I raised the issue of genocide, though I was well aware of issues around the Holocaust and the terrible things that had happened in the Second World War when 6 million Jews were annihilated by the Nazis, I heard about what was happening in Cambodia, and as a brand new young MP, one of my first speeches was about our failure to have stopped happening in Cambodia what had happened elsewhere in the world in the generation before me, in my father's generation. And some of you will have read things like the killing fields. You'll know about that expression, year zero, and what Pol Pot and his comrades tried to achieve by returning that country to year zero. So I contested that. I tried to engage in that issue, and it opened my mind and the doors to many other comparable and similar issues. So as a member of the House of Commons, I had the chance to take part in international affairs and debates as well as the domestic things. And I did that for nearly 20 years. And I then had a disagreement with my political party over issues that were previously conscience questions, bioethical issues mainly. And when they decided that these were going to become party policy rather than conscience questions, I said I didn't feel able to stand on this platform again, and I decided to stand down. I was made a professor at one of the universities in Liverpool, and that's what I thought I would do then for the rest of my life. But like a prisoner trying to get out of the penitentiary. I was given a life sentence for bad behaviour because Her Majesty the Queen, our late head of state, Her Majesty the Queen invited me to become a member of the House of Lords. So I went to the House of Lords straight after being in the Commons, but I went as an independent crossbench peer. And so with no longer any party affiliations, and this was a relief for me because having been a chief whip of my party and its spokesman on many issues, to have the freedom then to build coalitions and alliances around the issues I care about was a new lease of life entirely. Some of you I've worked with on some of these issues over the years. North Korea is an issue that we're obviously here to talk about today. You'll say, why on earth did you get involved or interested in North Korea? That was the last part of your question, I think. Would you like me to address that now? Or?
Yeah, I'll make some comments. That's amazing, Lord Alton. I am particularly touched by your story about what your mother told you. And I really want to spend all night to talk about how you lit up the candle. But I think that the guests of today are much more interested in North Korean issues. Maybe we can spend another time to talk about your venture in other areas. But as to the North Korean issues, I understand since 2002 you have made approximately 400 interventions, like questions, speeches, meetings in the UK Parliament regarding North Korean human rights issues. And you are continued to co-chair all-party group on North Korea in the UK Parliament. Was there any particular region that drew your attention to one of the most hidden countries in the world? I know that you have some beautiful, heartfelt story about Timothy, North Korean defectors. Probably, maybe the reason why you get involved in. Just please share with me.
Well, I'll come to Timothy in due course, if I may, because he's only the latest in a long line of people who've come to the British Parliament and told their own stories. I record some of those stories in this book, Building Bridges, Is There Hope for North Korea? Why did I get interested? Because a colleague was unable to meet an escapee, a defector, who'd come to London. My colleague, Baroness Cox, Caroline Cox, is now in her 80s. And if I told you that only last month she was in Nagorno-Karabakh in a war zone, and she was also in northern Nigeria in a war zone, doing extraordinary things. She and I travelled to North Korea together on 3 occasions. But on this occasion, so we're going back to about the year 2000, a young man had come expecting to see her, and she was away. So her office telephoned me and said, could I see this escapee? And I said, but I don't know anything about North Korea. And the young man said, well, no one knows much about North Korea, so that's all right. And I laughed, because it showed he had exactly the right attitude in dealing with legislators. So I went to see this person. I took him for a cup of tea, and a translator translated for us. And he told me the story about how during the arduous march, during the famine in North Korea, that his wife and 2 children had died, and then he tried to escape, and his other child had died en route trying to get out of the country. So I was pretty shocked hearing his story. I was even more shocked when he said he had been going back over the River Yalu to get more people, to help other people to escape from North Korea. And he knew that he could lose his own life as a consequence of doing that, showing incredible courage. So I promised him, I said, look, I'm not the British government. I'm not a government minister. I'm just a member of this place. And the more I was telling him what I couldn't do and what I wasn't, the less helpful I thought this reply was. And so maybe I remembered my mother's words about better to light a candle. And so I said to him, I will try to tell your story in Parliament. This I can do. So I put down a motion in Parliament to have a debate about North Korea, about security, because Yamyani nuclear reactor had just been reactivated, and human rights, both of those things. Not one, but both of those things. And to my surprise, time was allocated for this debate, a 3-hour debate. And I had to learn quite quickly what issues to try and crystallize. And I have good friends who are international lawyers, I have friends who work in the Foreign Office, I have friends who have been ambassadors, the sort of people in this room today. And I drew heavily on their expertise and knowledge. And so I introduced the debate. The next day the telephone rang and the man said he was the North Korean ambassador in London. And I said, really? And of course, we had ended the war, the armistice was over for us, we had created diplomatic relations with North Korea, we had sent a British ambassador to Pyongyang, and this was the man who had just arrived in London. He'd only been there for a few weeks, and he said, we wish to complain about the speech that you have made yesterday. It was on the BBC. And I said, well, if you want to complain, you better come in and see me. And so Ri Yong-ho, whose name has been in the news recently, because there is speculation about what may have happened to him in North Korea. He was the first North Korean ambassador in London. He came in and he said, you have been talking to too many Americans. And I said, I've not spoken to any Americans, but I have met a North Korean. Who was that? I said, well, I'm not telling you this man's identity, but I have no reason to disbelieve him. Anyway, I said, you don't allow people into North Korea, so how would I know if it's true or not? And he said, would you go? And I thought, yes, but would I come back? Lady Cox, Caroline Cox, said to me, yes, if we can pay our own way, if we can raise human rights cases, we mustn't go if we're going to be used in a propaganda exercise. We had an ambassador who was going to monitor the visit for us to check that it wasn't being unscrupulously used by them, so we agreed to go. And we were able to raise human rights cases, and when we returned, I said, let's found an all-party parliamentary group, so Conservative, Labour, Liberal and Independents, and across both houses, House of Commons and House of Lords, on North Korea. Now, why should Britain be interested? Well, for one thing, 1,000 British servicemen fighting alongside the Republic of Korea in the Korean War, nothing like the numbers of Koreans who lost their lives, but 1,000 British servicemen had died in the Korean War alongside you, our allies. So we have lots of reasons why we should care about what happens on this peninsula. But for me, predominantly it's because of my passion for human rights. And in this year, Dr. Park, this is the 75th anniversary year from the formation of the Convention on the Crime of Genocide by Raphael Lemkin, a Jewish lawyer, 40 of whom his relatives were murdered by the Nazis in the Holocaust. And it's the 75th year of a document I describe a lot in this book, which is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And of course, all 30 of those articles in that declaration are honoured in the breach, disregarded every day in North Korea. And there's one other anniversary this year. It is the 10th anniversary. Others in this room were very heavily involved with our good friend Michael Kirby, the Australian jurist, the judge who chaired the Commission of Inquiry report for the United Nations, which 10 years ago this year found that crimes against humanity were being committed in North Korea, and it recommended that those who had taken the decisions to commit those crimes, that is, at the highest levels of leadership, should be sent to the International Criminal Court to be tried there for the things that they had done. So all of these were issues that our all-party group has continued to raise. As within the next 2 months, we have 2 more meetings in the British Parliament of the all-party group, one of which is to host a visit from the Republic of Korea by some of your representatives from the National Assembly who are coming to meet members of our Parliament to talk about these issues of joint interest. So I hope that's not too long an answer, but you asked me to tell you why I got involved.
Sure, that's an amazing story, and it's easy for someone who would raise that issue once, twice, but not many people do that for 20, 30 years. I think that's amazing. Certainly, it has been decades since the international community have raised the issue of North Korean human rights. So there has been improvements and developments. As you mentioned, there was a commission of inquiry established 2013. An eminent former Supreme Court justice from Australia led the commission and determined that there was massive crimes against humanity. Nevertheless, we see shortcomings in these activities because of limitation of the United Nations and international communities and the current international politics. What do you believe are the most serious problems in this system?
I think you need to go back to 1948 and to see the valiant attempt that Raphael Lemkin and his colleagues made to try to prevent the atrocities of the Holocaust from happening again. And then read Justice Kirby's report and you will see there that he says in terms, he uses these words, he says that the only parallel that he could draw was with what happened during the Nazi period in Germany. That's a shocking, terrible thing for a jurist to have to say. In fact, he said of North Korea, it is a state without parallel. And I could read some of the description to you of some of the things that he found, but it is truly shocking. Now, in 1948, the Convention on the Crime of Genocide said that signatories to the convention, they included the United Kingdom, had a duty to prevent these things from happening again. They had a duty to protect the population of that country where the genocide or attempted genocide might be taking place. And they had a duty to punish those responsible. So to prevent, to protect and punish. After what happened in Bosnia, a further duty has been added, and that is the duty to predict. So in other words, countries like yours and mine have a duty to observe and see what is happening in other jurisdictions and to say we believe that the emerging signs of genocide are occurring in that place. So why hasn't this led to why did it not stop Rwanda from happening when 1 million people died? Why didn't it stop Darfur, which I visited at the very beginning of the genocide? I wrote an article, if this isn't genocide, what is? 300,000 people died there, 2 million people were displaced, and eventually the International Criminal Court said about Darfur that Omar al-Bashir, the president of Sudan, was responsible for a genocide. He's been indicted by the ICC, but he still has never been tried by them. And the reason for that, of course, is that to get a referral to the ICC, if you are not a signatory to the Treaty of Rome, and the People's Republic of China is clearly not a signatory to that treaty, then the only way to do that is to get a resolution of the Security Council. And guess what? China and Russia, as permanent members of the Security Council, make it clear that they will veto any such referral. So this brings in a roadblock always in moving these things forward. So is there anything more we can do? Yes, and this is where it needs clever lawyers like you to play your part, because you can create hybrid tribunals. We've done it before, did it in the case of Cambodia, there are other examples, but tribunals can be established without going to the ICC, or indeed the ICJ. So if it's not possible to use the mechanisms that are there to deal with these things, we have to create ad hoc mechanisms to do it instead. And I think that is a challenge to us to make a reality of what Lemkin tried to do. Winston Churchill said when the Allies went into the concentration camps, into Bergen-Belsen, into Auschwitz, he said the crimes were so unspeakable, Churchill said there was no name, no word, which he could use to describe what had occurred. It was Lemkin who created the word using the Greek and the Latin, of genos for family, side for cutting, the cutting of the family. That is what genocide amounts to. It is the crime above all crimes. And if we can't do something about that, if we can't break the culture of impunity, then those who commit these atrocities will go on doing it over and over and over again. If we in the liberal democracies believe in the rule of law, if that is at the heart of our creed, and you're called credo, if it's at the heart of our creed that we believe in the rule of law, then we have to make the rule of law more effective.
Thank you. That's a really powerful answer. I remember that at one point during the World War II, when Allies finally conquered, Germany, and they reached out to the Auschwitz camp. One person from the camp told the soldiers that you came too late because everybody was executed. So I think that it's really a matter of urgency, but I share with you that there's certainly a difficulties, and you put an important agenda to those, especially lawyers, as to the way we could overcome these difficulties. One thing I just want to share with you is the freedom of religion and beliefs in North Korea. Or many aspects of human rights violations were particularly concerned about oppression against the freedom of religion and beliefs. North Korea, given its totalitarian regime, it appears that regime itself inherently hostile to freedom of religion and beliefs. What are your views on this?
Just before we turn to that, and I will try and answer your question, I was just thinking as we were talking about the role of judges and what more judges and lawyers can do, and the challenge that is thrown down to us, of some words that I end this book with, and they're the words of Judge Thomas Bergenthal. As a young boy, he was incarcerated in Auschwitz, so he was one of the victims of Europe's genocide against the Jews. He survived the Shoah, and this is what he says: the human mind is simply not able to grasp this terrible truth. A nation transformed into a killing machine, programmed to destroy millions of innocent human beings for no reason other than that they were different. If humans can so easily wash the blood of our fellow humans off our hands, then what hope is there for sparing future generations from a repeat of the genocides and mass killings of the past? One cannot hope to protect mankind from crimes such as those that were visited upon us unless one struggles to break the cycle of hatred and violence that invariably leads to ever more suffering by innocent human beings. So what Judge Bergenthal, what Raphael Lemkin hoped for humanity, rests on creating the architecture that will stop these atrocity crimes from reoccurring in relentless cycles. And that, I think, will require a recalibrating of our resources and our determination in every generation to do that. And that, at one level, means taking more seriously the things that we as nations sign up to. There is no point signing up to the Convention on the Crime of Genocide as you have done, as we have done, unless you're going to make a reality of it. And that also goes, and here I come to your question, that also goes to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights specifically relates to the issue of freedom of religion or belief. It says that everyone has the right to believe or not to believe, or to change their belief. Will play their part, but some of the former ambassadors here will think about the best way of engaging diplomatically to push this issue up the agenda. I mean, this is a neglected issue. I call it the orphaned right. Think of an orphaned child without a parent. This is an orphaned right. Article 18 is often unmentioned, and yet it was Eleanor Roosevelt, and this is appropriate, isn't it, in the context of a fireside chat, who was one of the people who crafted the Declaration. She was one of those who wrote it, and she said Article 18 was a crucial right. And of course, in the world in which we live today, learning to live together and to respect people for their beliefs or non-beliefs is hugely important. And I just add to that about non-belief. I took up the case a few years ago of a young man, an atheist, in Indonesia. He was put in prison in Indonesia because he put on his Facebook site that he didn't believe in God. No one should be put in prison for saying they didn't believe in God, and that is as much a breach of Article 18 as the other examples I've given you today. One thing you can do about this, I mean, organisations like Aid to the Church in Need, Open Doors has just published a new report. We had the launch of it at Westminster. I attended it, I spoke at it with a young man called Timothy,
who had escaped from North Korea. Open Doors publishes every year a list of the countries where people are persecuted. There are 340 million Christians persecuted worldwide, and people, of course, from other traditions, Rohingya Muslims, Uyghur Muslims, Buddhists. There are people from the Baha'i faith, Yazidis, Shabaks, there are Hazaras in Afghanistan. There's so many people, minorities, in their countries persecuted for reasons of religion or belief. So it's important we stand with them and shine a light on their circumstances. So Open Doors does this. Each year they detail what is happening worldwide, and for 20 years, in 19 of them, this year included, North Korea is top of that list for persecution for reasons of religious belief. Do read that report, it's online, Open Doors. And CSW, Christian Solidarity Worldwide, Aid to the Church in Need, ACN is currently campaigning about Maria Shabazz, CSW is campaigning on Zhang Zheng, and many other individual examples. We can all do more about these things. We brought those organizations together about 3 or 4 years ago and said, let's have a day, at least one day a year. We get together, to worry about, and rightly so, about climate change, about poverty, social justice, whatever it may be. These are all things to care about. Why are we doing nothing about people like those I've just described? So we created a day, it's called Red Wednesday, red for the colour of people's blood. And on Red Wednesday, we light up, even the Houses of Parliament now are lit up on Red Wednesday to commemorate those suffering around the world because of Article 18 abuses. And it's a way of focusing, and usually we get a debate in both houses, or at least a question in both houses on that day around particular cases or countries where violations are occurring. So we need to focus people more. So perhaps Credo, particularly under the notable and extraordinary leadership of some of the people in this room, will be able to do some of this in the future. They're not just members of the Security Council. Along with countries like Pakistan, they're members of the United Nations Human Rights Council, which the United Kingdom is now again a member of, I'm glad to say, but I'm very sorry the Republic of Korea is no longer a member of. And when I look at some of those who are, I think it's an outrage that a thriving, vibrant democracy such as yours is not a member of the Human Rights Council. But that is not a reason for not using the General Assembly, for instance, to raise these sorts of issues that we've just been discussing. So your country can still raise its voice in that way and challenge the People's Republic of China specifically about people who are citizens of Korea, because that is what we're talking about here. We're not talking about the fact they come from North Korea, they're citizens of Korea. And yet these are people who, when they are arrested in the People's Republic of China, they can then be repatriated. And Michael Kirby, the COI's report, details what happens to particularly women who are repatriated if they've become pregnant while they've been in China for eugenic reasons. It's racialism of the worst kind. Those women are then forcibly aborted because they have become pregnant at the hands of a Chinese man. And this is shocking at any number of levels. And it is something that we should do far more about. Yes, I've raised this directly with the Chinese ambassador in London. I sent them a copy of Michael Kirby's, the COI's report. I had quite an interesting discussion with one of the senior officials in the embassy, and he was more receptive to what I had to say when I explained about the racialist reasons for forced abortions taking place. So I think this is something that should be raised, and given that your country has been so generous in taking 30,000 of people who have been able to reach the Republic of Korea, you are in a very, very strong position to do so, and to remind them what the obligations are under the Refugee Convention. The United Kingdom is not in a bad position either, because we have taken specifically over 1,000 North Koreans. I think after the Republic of Korea, that's probably more than any other country, and I'm proud of my country for having done so. Not least because of people like Timothy. Let me digress for a moment, because I like to tell this story. One day at my university office in Liverpool, my secretary came in and said, "David, there's a North Korean in the reception." This was an unusual thing to happen. And so I went and found the young man who was in the reception, He'd been wandering around the streets looking for the university. Someone had told him that he should come and find me. I was slightly apprehensive, but he'd got soaking wet in the rain. I said, "Come in, tell me why you're here." And Timothy explained to me how he hadn't escaped once. He'd escaped twice from North Korea. The first time he got as far as Mongolia, and with a small group of people who'd come out of North Korea, and they were caught and they were sent back. But in a way demonstrating that there is even humanity, even among prison guards. The prison guard said to him, "Timothy, you will be sent to one of the camps today, and you will end your life there. If that happens, you will end your life there." When the prison guard left, he left the door open of Timothy's cell. So for the second time, he escaped. And this time he got as far as Shanghai and ended up in a prison. His grandmother had been a secret Christian, and he had not had particular faith, but she had taught him how to pray, so he started praying and praying and praying. Someone told this story. The story went out of the prison, and an American was able to intervene, and they released him into the custody of the American, who then helped him to come to, guess where, Seoul. He went to the British embassy because he had been told that there was a British scheme for North Koreans, and he was able to come to the United Kingdom. And here he was, knocking on my door, showing me where he'd been tortured when he'd been caught by the North Korean guards. He told me he wanted to play his part one day in a reunified Korea, and how could he learn about politics and international affairs. And to cut a long story short, my wife helped him with his English. Timothy got his degree from one of our universities and then got his master's degree in international politics from Liverpool University. He is the first North Korean ever to graduate from any of our universities. And he now works for that charity, Open Doors, I mentioned to you. He spent a year working in the British Parliament for my colleague, Fiona Bruce, who's a Conservative member of the House of Commons, and she is the co-chair of the all-party group on North Korea. So Timothy is now married, has 2 young children, and still passionate. I even heard from him this morning by email, cares passionately about the future of the people of North Korea and has been extraordinarily courageous. Those who have come out and are living here or in countries like mine, when they give their stories, when they witness to what has happened to them, like some of those that I record in that little book, I never forget a lady who came and gave evidence to us in a room packed with members of the House of Commons and Lords. She described what the conditions were like in one of the prison camps, and people were in tears when they heard some of the things that had happened to her. This changes hearts, but then it changes minds. It radicalizes people, and they feel that there's no point just listening. You think, what can I do about this? And that, I think, still remains the challenge. We have to think about what practical things can we do. And one of them is that 10 years, this year is the 10th anniversary since the Commission of Inquiry report. Now is the time to revisit it. And there's one aspect of it that Michael Kirby left hanging with a question mark over it. He said that given that the Genocide Convention is very concise in a technical way, he said, I couldn't find evidence of genocide because the political classes, for instance, are not a recognized group under the Genocide Convention. But he said it's possible that there is an argument to be made about those who have been imprisoned for religious reasons. And if we can find enough evidence on that, it is possible that the charge of genocide could be found against the North Korean regime. And I think that maybe doing something like the independent tribunal that Sir Geoffrey Nice had for the Uyghurs in London, that maybe something like that needs to be done again. If nobody else will do it, we do it ourselves. If none of the mechanisms that are supposed to do these things do it, we were talking earlier on about the inadequacy of some of the United Nations structures. You wonder sometimes on whose side some of the paid officials actually are, and we see a lot of subversion of United Nations institutions by the People's Republic of China. Well, we have to do what we can to reclaim that ground, but if we can't do that, let's create structures of our own to do the things that need to be done so that people like Timothy can be heard, but so that another generation don't suffer in the way that his generation and those preceding him have.
Well, that's amazing. What a beautiful story of Timothy. How old was he when he came to see you?
He was about 19 at that time, just a teenager.
I see.
And had nothing. He'd been working in the evenings in restaurants because I said, well, we might be able to get some money to help with your courses. He said, no, I'm working, he said. And I just was more and more amazed by his determination and his courage. And he has been an extraordinary example. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you he sent me this morning a picture of a place where he spoke yesterday in a church. 400 people were there to listen to him telling his story. So he is touching hearts and minds in an extraordinary way. Our job, surely, with all the privileges and liberties and freedoms that we enjoy, is to give platforms to people like him and to use the resources that we have.
Thank you. This is my final question, and then I will open the question from the floor, but maybe organizer would prepare the microphone. You have visited North Korea 4 times. You were sanctioned by China, but you are not sanctioned by North Korea yet. So are you going to visit if they invite you again?
Well, I've also been sanctioned now by Iran as well. So one of our government ministers said to me, David, will you give me a list of countries where you haven't been sanctioned? And we have to keep a bit of a sense of humour. They even sanctioned my family, so my children. I have 4 wonderful children. My daughter is a lawyer, so she put up a WhatsApp group, and it's called Badge of Honour. So I don't think my children are going to be intimidated any more than me. But yes, the North Koreans have told me I will not be able to travel to North Korea again. I wasn't intending to go anytime soon. And to underline the point, their ambassador came in to see me with his number 2. His number 2, you met and I met a couple of days ago. This man was the most senior diplomat, North Korean diplomat in the world to defect. His ambassador had not liked a speech I'd made about North Korea and about human rights. So he came in to tell me, he had a long, big folder with all my speeches and questions in. I was very impressed that somebody had read all of these. And he said, he started reading me a denunciation. And in the end, he got bored and he said to me, so, he said, oh, we hate you. So I said, Ambassador, I love you, but I hate your system. And I hope one day it changes. Now, as we were leaving the building, the House of Lords, he looked around to see if the number 2 was overhearing him, and he wasn't. And the ambassador grabbed my hand and said, no hard feelings. And I thought, this is a very strange diplomatic exchange. Those of you amongst you who have been ambassadors, I hope you haven't treated any parliamentarians quite as I was treated that day. But anyway, a few weeks later, the Foreign Office telephoned me to say, there's a man who's arrived here with his wife and children who says that he knows you, and he's the number 2 in the North Korean embassy. And I said, oh, that would be Mr. Tae. And he said, yes, Mr. Tae wishes to defect. So I thought, this is extraordinary. Mr. Tae tells me, these are his words, he said, I was your spy. He said, my job was to send back all the speeches and all the questions. I was so pleased. I thought, good, they monitored every one of those 400 interventions and sent it back to Pyongyang. Well, I would want them to do that. Of course I would want them to do that. Because I want them to know that despite the information blockade that they have tried to impose around North Korea, in breach, I might add, of Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, despite that, information comes out and information goes in. It was one of the reasons I campaigned for successfully the BBC to extend its transmissions to the Korean Peninsula. And I again would say to those, especially of you who are retired diplomats, please encourage the British government not to reduce the Korean service. I'm having a fight with them at the moment. They're not going to abolish the service, but they are going to reduce it. And I think that would be a great tragedy. This is a time to keep information flowing. If we want to change things, it'll be by people knowing what's going on. And that brings me to the heart of your question. I love your country. I love the Republic of Korea. I was disappointed that you were saying and doing less about human rights issues. I understand the reasons why you might want to come to that conclusion, but I'm delighted that your new government has said that it is going to increase its interest in human rights and speak more vociferously about these things. As I said, the Helsinki process didn't neglect one at the expense of the other. We've got to do both. These are not binary, they're not mutually exclusive things. Caring about security should be the top priority of any government. But alongside that must sit its belief in the human rights and human dignity of every single one of its citizens. And for you, that means all of the people of North Korea. So how can we exclude human rights from the equation? We can't do that. And I think we've got to find more imaginative ways of breaking the information blockade, of telling the stories, of putting out new publications, of maybe examining the genocide point I mentioned earlier on, of commemorating the 10th anniversary of the COI, and using this year, the 75th anniversary of those two documents, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Genocide Convention, in order to reawaken this fundamental belief in the rule of law, which makes us different from authoritarian regimes.